Hello everyone, Silent K here, and we've got a new expansion on the horizon, Tempest of the Gods, and that means it's time for more card reviews. No release date on the expansion yet, although it should be in about a month, and one thing to note about this expansion is that each class is going to be getting 2 legendaries this time, so keep that in mind as we go on. Also, this is my first time recording from my new place. The acoustics in here aren't very good, and my computer seems a little louder than usual, so hopefully it doesn't sound too bad, but we'll just see how it goes.
Ding dong!
We'll be using the same format as last time. That is that each card will be rated based on power level and utility, not necessarily on whether or not it will appear in a competitive deck, but basically if a card is around the same power level as existing cards and doesn't offer any new utility, then it would be rated a 0. Anything stronger than current cards or with new utility would get a positive score, and anything worse than current cards would get a negative score. So let's jump right into it, going in order of class with neutrals last. First up for Bloodcraft we have Spiderweb Imp, 2 mana 1/4, Ward, Fanfare, deal 2 damage to your leader if Vengeance is not active for you. So typically only 2 types of Vengeance cards see play. Those with strong comeback mechanics, which allow you to slow down your opponent when you're at low health and heal back up, or those with burst damage potential, so you can quickly end the game while you're at low health before your opponent can kill you. And then the vanilla Vengeance cards, which usually get buffed if you're in Vengeance, don't typically see play. But this is a bit better design for Vengeance vanilla cards. Instead of being an average card that gets better when you're in Vengeance, this one is above average and just deals damage to you if you're not in Vengeance. And being a 2 mana card, you don't really expect a strong effect anyway, so a 1/4 ward for 2 is pretty good. Overall +1. Next up, Baphomet, 2 mana 2/1. Fanfare, put a random Bloodcraft follower with at least 5 attack from your deck into your hand, enhance 5, then subtract 3 from its cost. This is a pretty decent fetch card for its normal cost. It kind of works like Maid Leader. It's a cheap card draw that fetches very specific types of cards. Although unlike Maid Leader, you're typically not going to be able to play what you draw for a few turns, since it's a card that has 5 attack or more. And the enhanced cost doesn't offer a lot of benefits, but it does have some minor curving and synergies that you can work with it, like a 5-cost Baphomet into a 6-cost Tempest, or a Bloody Mary into a 1-cost Soul Dealer. Overall, it's decent, but it's not going to be overpowering, so +1. On to Dragoncraft, Wrathdrake, 5 mana 4/4. Fanfare, deal 1 damage to all other followers. Enhance 8, deal 3 damage instead. This is basically Lucius Goblin Slayer with a buff. Dragon does lack solid 5-drops, but this one's not likely to see play. There are a few deal 1 damage AoEs in the game for 5 mana or more, and they don't see play in competitive decks. At that point in the game, 1 damage isn't likely to do enough. So overall -1. Next, Venomous Pussworm, 5 mana 4/5. At the end of your turn, randomly discard one of the lowest cost cards in your hand and gain +2/+2. So you get very good stats for the cost, especially with discard synergies. If it also puts a Luxfang kit on the board or draws you a card, even better. But ultimately it's just a big vanilla follower. Overall score is 0. Onto Forestcraft, Fairy Cage, 4 mana Amulet. Whenever you play a card, put a fairy into your hand if you don't already have one. On the minus side, you do drop a lot of tempo playing this, and it does have limited synergy. Since most Forestcraft decks like to put multiple fairies in their hand, you might not be able to get any value out of it right away, but it's hard to ignore the infinite fairy potential. Any infinite value card can be a very strong combo with the right synergy. And with this card, if you only have 1 fairy in your hand, you can play it and get another one and play that and get another one and play that and get another one until your board is full. So a card like this could have a deck built around it one day. So overall 0. Next up, Krystal Lea Erin, 6 mana 4/6, Ward, Fanfare, restore 3 defense to your leader, enhance 8, recover 1 evolution point. This is a pretty good card for slowing down the mid game, but it's a bit too slow for typical Forestcraft decks. It might see play in a slower deck like a Silverbolt deck or a Rose Queen deck, but even that's kind of unlikely. Overall, -1. Onto Havencraft, Gravekeeper Sonya, 5 mana 3/5, Ward, Fanfare. If there are no other allied followers in play, this follower gains +1/+0 and can't be damaged by spells and effects. This is a great removal resistant ward for slower decks. The bane of wards that cost 5 or more mana is hard removal like Dance of Death, so being immune to spells and effects is pretty good. The reason it might not see play though is because there's a lot of competition in the 5-drop slot for Havencraft. You have your Radiance Angels and your Ancient Lion Spirits, so it's very hard to squeeze this card in. Just on its own though, we'll give it a score of +1. Next up, Heavenly Aegis, Legendary, 9 mana 8/8, can't be damaged, can't be affected by any other card's abilities except for those that change this card's attack or defense. So this card is straight up immune to all removal and damage. Keep in mind that it says can't be affected by any other card's abilities and not any other follower's abilities. So that means it also can't be affected by hard removal, bane, random effects that remove followers, like Tribunal. It can't be removed by your own Nemesis Decree. It's basically on the board for good. Now this is a bit too slow for Seraph decks that want to end the game on turn 9, but it should be really good for Guardian Sun decks. Not only do you get this card, but you also get it with Ward. And typically Guardian Sun wants to make it to turn 10 to play Prince of Darkness anyway. And actually this card might be good enough to just straight up replace Prince of Darkness in that deck. Overall +1. On to Runecraft, Halo Golem, 4 mana 4/3, Earthright, deal 3 damage to an enemy. Now, as I said before, Runecraft is not my class. It was my least played class before Rise of Bahamut, and I have gotten a little bit of experience with spell boosting decks and whatnot, but Earthright I still haven't really touched. So when it comes to questions like, is this a good card in Earthright? Does Earthright typically have an extra Earth Sigil on the board by that turn? If it does it need to save it for a better card? Is Earthright lacking good 4-drops? Does it need this sort of effect in that deck? I can't really answer those questions on my own, so it's not really a card I can review properly, but it seems pretty good. Overall +1, maybe? Next up, Mutagenic Bolt, 6 mana spell, transform all enemy followers into Flame Rats. A Flame Rat is... I'm not quite sure yet. They typically release the token cards with the cards that generate them, but in this case they forgot to. I've been told a Flame Rat is a 1/1 that deals 1 damage to both leaders at the start of your turn, and if that's the case, this spell isn't going to be very good. It's basically like a multi-target petrification for transforming enemy followers, or a Winter's Caprice for 1 more mana. And on the plus side, it's one-sided, so you aren't transforming your own stuff into 1/1s. But on the minus side, if you can't deal with those 1/1s, then your opponent gets to do double damage next turn, because they get to hit you with the 1/1s, and they do 1 damage to you each as they proc. So in a race, they would win. In a rat race, you could say. Typically, the expensive Runecraft spells don't see play anyway, regardless of what they are. And since this is a weird, slightly more expensive, slightly worse, sometimes better version of a card that already exists, it probably won't see play either. Overall score -2. Onto Shadowcraft, Demon Lord Ekdar, Legendary, 7 mana 5/6, Necromancy 3, summon a zombie, repeat for remaining shadows or until your area is full, then give all other allied followers +2/+0 and rush until the end of the turn. That's a mouthful. So basically, if you have a lot of shadows, then you get a lot of removal. If you don't have a lot of shadows, then you don't get a lot of removal. You really only need 1 zombie for it to be worth it though. As to what deck this fits into, it doesn't really fit into an aggro deck or a Nephthys deck, so that really only leaves a Last Words control deck. And in that deck, it directly competes with Lord of the Flies, and it has its pros and cons when you compare it to Lord of the Flies. With this one, you can have a stronger board clear on the first turn, but Lord of the Flies can give you more value over time if it stays on the board. So this one's not strictly better. We'll give her an overall score of 0. Next up, Goblin Zombie, 3 mana 2/3. At the end of your turn, use Necromancy 4 to gain +2/+2. So this is basically a slower Apprentice Necromancer, since you get the buff at the end of your turn, and it's on 1 body instead of 2. It does have the potential to snowball, but that's very unlikely. Since Apprentice Necromancer doesn't usually see play, and this is a slightly worse version of that card, we're going to have to give it a -1. Onto Swordcraft, Captain Walfrid, And before we get started, can we just take a moment to appreciate this artwork? First, we have a pretty awesome airship bursting through the clouds in the background. And in the foreground, we have this handsome bastard with a strong, stern expression on his face and a fantastic mustache. A+ on the artwork. As for the card, 8 mana 5/5, Fanfare, give +2/+2 to all other allied followers, give all allied officers ward. So it curves in pretty well from Koga Kunoichi, I guess, who doesn't see play herself. Other than that, it's pretty much worse than all other 8-drops for Swordcraft. Your Alexander or Fangblade will be better in a control deck than this guy, since this guy requires you to have a board going into the turn. Overall, -1. Next, Tristan of the Round Table, 5 mana 3/4. Fanfare, if an allied commander is in play, gain last words, summon a Tristan of the Round Table. There's 2 questions you have to ask yourself when reviewing a card that requires an allied commander to be in play. And first, is it good on its own? And this one is not. It loses 1/1 in stats and is just a vanilla minion with no effect. And 2, if it's not good on its own, is it good in Banner Sword? Because that's the only deck that can reliably keep a commander on the field. And again, the answer is no. This card is itself a commander, so that means it dilutes the Maid Leader pulls. And the only time you want to dilute your Maid Leader pulls is if the card is exceptionally good, like Avonblader. This one is not really worth it, so it doesn't really have a place in any deck. Overall, -1. On to the neutral cards. First up, Goblin Princess, 5 mana 2/1, Fanfare, summon 2 goblins. Last words, put a Goblin King into your hand. Goblins are of course your standard 1 mana 1/2s, and Goblin King you may not remember from the beginning of the game. It's a 4 mana 5/5 with ward. So for 5 mana you get fair stats over 3 bodies, and you get a pretty decent token when that dies. In a normal deck it's not very special. In a Neutralcraft deck it's pretty good value though. You're getting your Valkyrie Spear buffs over 3 followers, and again for Goblin King when you play that, so not bad. Overall score of 0 for normal deck and +1 for Neutralcraft. And finally, the poster child himself, Zeus. 10 mana 5/10, Storm, Bane, and Ward. So he's a little bit overcosted for the individual effects he has. For example, a 10 mana Storm follower that you just want to hit face with could be compared with Genesis Dragon, which hits for 7 for 1 less mana. Or a big Bane follower could be compared with a number of other cards, which are better costed and better statted than this one. Or for a big ward at the end of the game. You have other options that are better statted, better mana cost, but putting them all together on one card makes it pretty flexible. If you want the face damage, it's there. If you need the Bane, it's there. If you need a big ward, it's there. So we'll give it an overall score of 0. So even though it can be a useful, flexible card, for 10 mana it's not going to end the game, so we can't give it a higher score than that. And that's all for now. I hope you found this interesting and informative. Feel free to leave your own thoughts and discussions in the comments below. Thank you all for watching. Please tune in again next time.